A peculiar sister stayed with my fiancé and ended up marrying him on the same day our wedding was going to be, after only meeting him once. Christmas had always been my favorite holiday. It was the time of year when, despite all the family tensions, I managed to find a respite, a small corner of peace among the flickering lights and laughter that filled the house. But that was before everything changed, before my life was divided into a before and an after. Now, every flash of Christmas lights reminds me of the darkness that settled into my life a year ago. I am a 27-year-old who, until recently, thought I had learned how to navigate the turbulent waters of a dysfunctional family. But what happened last Christmas was not something I could prepare for. My sister Amara, the golden child of the family, the undisputed favorite of our parents, took from me something more than my effort and my work. She stole my confidence, my enthusiasm, and a part of myself that I will never be able to recover. Amara and I were identical in appearance, but opposite in the way the world and our family treated us. While I struggled to be seen, she was always at the center of everything. When we were children, small acts of favoritism seemed insignificant. She chose the gifts first, received the warmest words, the most sincere smiles. But those small differences accumulated over the years like a snowfall that slowly buries everything in its path. The distance between us began to grow in adolescence. Amara enjoyed being the center of attention, and over time, her words toward me became crueler, more calculated. She was never a protective older sister. Rather, I was a rival in every sense of the word. Although I never wanted to compete, he simply wanted to exist in peace, to have his own place in the family. But with Amara in the same room, that was impossible. The climax of our complicated relationship came when we both applied to college. For me, it was a dream to enter a prestigious institution, a step towards a future that I had carefully imagined. I spent months preparing my application, reviewing every detail, perfecting every word. For her part, Amara seemed carefree, confident, as if she had already secured her place. I wondered how she could be so calm, but I didn't think much of it. I thought that, for the first time, our paths were going to separate, and that we could both finally find our space away from each other's shadow. When the answers came, my heart sank. I was rejected from my first choice, while Amara received a triumphant acceptance. The joy on his face, the celebration of my parents, it all felt like a slap in the face. But the worst came when I discovered the truth. Amara had taken the essay I had written with so much effort, plagiarized it, and presented it as her own. My own words, my ideas, my dedication, everything had served to open the doors of the university of my dreams. The pain and betrayal burned me inside. I tried to talk to my parents, seeking support, a minimal show of understanding. But, as always, they sided with Amara. "Let it go," they told me. "There is nothing to do now." His words were like a spinning knife in an open wound. For the first time in my life, I decided that I was not going to stay silent. If they weren't going to defend me, I would do it myself. That night, with a broken heart and the Christmas lights glowing dimly in the living room, I wrote an email to the university. I exposed Amara's plagiarism, attached proof that the essay was mine, and asked them to take action. He knew that by doing so, he was crossing a point of no return. It was not just an academic question. I was facing favoritism, years of accumulated injustices. But I couldn't stand by while my efforts were trampled. The university's response came quickly. Amara was expelled for plagiarism, and the news hit our family like a bomb. My parents were furious with me, not for what Amara had done, but for my decision to ruin her future. Amara, for her part, looked at me with a hatred I had never seen before. There were no apologies, no regrets, just accusations and more resentment. That Christmas was the loneliest of my life. While everyone gathered to celebrate, I took refuge in my room, surrounded by silence and the cold certainty that I'd lost something irreparable. I did what I felt was right, but the cost was too high. My parents barely spoke to me, and Amara made it clear that she would never forgive me. A year later, the echo of that decision continues to haunt me. I have tried to rebuild my life, find a new purpose, but the emptiness is still there. Sometimes I wonder if I could have handled things differently, if the truth was really worth the price I paid. But every time I see my reflection in the mirror, I remind myself that despite everything, at least I have my dignity. Now, as Christmas approaches again, I feel a mix of emotions. I can't help but look at the bright lights on the streets and think about how something so beautiful can hide so much pain. Maybe one day I will find the peace I seek. But for now, all I can do is move forward, one step at a time. When Amara received the email from the university, her face changed in an instant. A mixture of disbelief and fury took over his expressions, and he looked at me with such hatred that for a moment I thought he would attack me on the spot. But he didn't do it. I knew I was trapped. I couldn't admit what I had done in front of our parents. What could I say? What stole my work? I knew there was no way out, but at the same time, I couldn't go to mom and dad for help. Admitting his guilt would mean accepting his betrayal. So, at that moment, his only recourse was to remain silent. However, my parents were not about to let college ruin their favorite daughter's bright future. Outrage took hold of them, and with the same ferocity with which they used to ignore my achievements, they decided to defend Amara at all costs. They sent an angry email to the university, demanding explanations, certain that it was all a misunderstanding and that there was no plagiarism involved. I watched from the shadows, knowing that the truth was about to come to light. The university's response came quickly. It was a forceful message, accompanied by irrefutable evidence. They had thoroughly reviewed Amara's application and noted that the work submitted matched word for word with the original essay, my essay. At that moment, a part of me naively hoped that my parents would finally see Amara for who she really was, that they would stop idealizing her and for the first time support me. But what happened was exactly the opposite. My parents, upon learning that I had been the one to report the plagiarism, turned on me with a rage I had never seen before. They yelled at me for days, accusing me of destroying my sister's life and future. It didn't matter that she had stolen my work, nor that I was the victim. For them, the real crime had been that I acted without consulting them. According to them, the correct thing would have been to talk to the family first. But I knew the truth. His solution would have been to protect Amara, as always, and ask me to forget everything. That confrontation at home was the breaking point. The masks fell, and it became clear that, to them, I would never be more than the problem daughter, the black sheep of the family. It didn't matter how hard I tried, or how many times I proved myself. They would always choose Amara. It was an indescribable pain, but also a revelation. I realized I had nothing to gain by staying there. My future was somewhere else, far from that house where I was never welcome. The months that followed were brutal. Every day at home was a constant battle, a wound that never healed. But I clung to the idea that I would soon go to college, a place where I could finally start over. And when the time came, I left without looking back. There were no emotional goodbyes, no promises to keep in touch. I knew I wouldn't go back because there was nothing worth going back to. College was a breath of fresh air. For the first time, I felt free. I met wonderful people, made genuine friends, and slowly built a new life away from the shadows of my family. It was at university where I met Leandro, a charming boy who was part of my group of friends. From the beginning, there was a special connection between us, but neither of us dared to take the first step. Before we graduated, Leandro finally worked up the courage to ask me to be his girlfriend. He confessed to me that he had been in love with me for years, but had never had the courage to tell me. His sincerity moved me deeply, and I accepted without hesitation. Our relationship was natural and comfortable from the beginning. We were already great friends, and that solid foundation made the transition to romance easy and genuine. Leandro knew about my family and my complicated relationship with them. I explained that I had little contact with my parents and that I hadn't spoken to Amara in years. I asked him to respect my decision to keep her out of my life, and he did so without question. However, for him, it was difficult to understand my situation. He came from a loving and close-knit family where everyone supported each other. His world was the complete opposite of mine. And although I admired him for it, I also felt a pang of envy every time he talked about his home. Despite our differences, our relationship flourished. Leandro showed me what it meant to be part of a functioning family, even if only as an outside observer. His parents were loving, his siblings were close, and the atmosphere at home was warm and welcoming. It was everything I had always wanted but never had. Sometimes that reality was difficult for me to accept, but Leandro always found a way to remind me that I was now part of something better, something that was really worth it. As we planned our future together, the shadow of my past slowly began to fade. I thought I had finally left behind all the pain and betrayal that marked my years at home. But life has a cruel way of reminding you that some wounds never fully heal. And although he didn't know it at the time, Amara's ghost had not disappeared. He was just waiting for the perfect moment to come back and destroy everything he had built. Despite our deep connection, there was always a gap in the relationship between Leandro and me. His inability to fully understand the emotional chaos that had been my childhood. Leandro came from a perfect family, the kind you only see in Christmas movies, with warm dinners, endless hugs, and sincere smiles. For him, the concept of dysfunctional families was something abstract, an oddity that only existed in the stories of others. I, on the other hand, knew very well what it meant to survive in a home where love was conditional and loyalties always favored some over others. Leandro tried, or at least that's what I thought. He accepted that there would be no reconciliation with my family, that my past was something I couldn't change. I trusted him, thinking that he had understood. But what he didn't know was that this superficial acceptance would be tested in the most painful way. 2 years before we got married, when I was 25 years old, Leandro proposed to me. It was a magical moment, one I had dreamed of for months. Obviously, I said yes. We had been together for 4 years, and I had no doubt that he was the man I wanted to spend my life with. His family had welcomed me with open arms, treating me like one of their own from the beginning. His parents were warm, his siblings adored me, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged to a real family. It was like all the emptiness I had felt in my heart was finally being filled. Preparations for the wedding began with enthusiasm. I wanted something small, intimate, something that really reflected our relationship. But I soon discovered that our differences, although manageable on a day-to-day basis, became a challenge in this context. For Leandro, the wedding wasn't just about us. It was a family event. He wanted to invite everyone, his parents, his brothers, his cousins, his uncles, even the childhood friends he hadn't seen in years. I, on the other hand, didn't have anyone on my side that I wanted to invite. I told him that only my closest friends would attend, and I made it clear that I did not want my family to be present. They didn't even know she was engaged. At first, he seemed to accept my decision, although with some discomfort. However, a week later, he confronted me with a request that left me cold. He wanted me to invite my family. According to him, he couldn't imagine a wedding without a family present from both sides. My eyes widened as I tried to understand why, after all our conversations, after everything I had shared with him about my past, I still felt like this was something negotiable. I reminded him calmly at first that my family was not a part of my life, that any invitation would be seen as an attempt at reconciliation, something she was not willing to do. But he insisted, saying that it was not about forgiving or rekindling relationships, but simply about avoiding awkward questions and appearances before his family. Leandro had never been selfish before. But this time, his insistence made me feel like I was choosing pride and the opinions of others over my well-being. It was one of our worst arguments. For days, we barely spoke to each other, both trapped in our own worlds of frustration and resentment. Finally, in a moment of vulnerability, Leandro confessed to me the real reason behind his insistence. He told me that his family was very conservative, that they deeply valued the family unit, and that he feared that my lack of relationship with my parents would project a bad image of me, and by extension, of him. It hurt me to hear those words. But what was worse was realizing that I wasn't thinking about how this would affect me emotionally. he cared more about what his family would think of me than what this situation meant to me as a person. At that moment, I should have realized something was wrong, but she was in love, and love often clouds judgment. Leandro and I reached a compromise. I agreed to call my parents, but with one firm condition. There would be no reconciliation, only an invitation. We would not talk about the past, nor would we try to heal wounds. It was a simple formality, and that was all she was willing to offer. The day I made that call was one of the most difficult days of my life. Hearing my mother's voice after so many years, I felt a mix of emotions that I couldn't decipher. There was anger, but also sadness. There was nostalgia, but also a sharp pain that reminded me why I had decided to walk away in the first place. I explained to him, with calculated coldness, that I was engaged and would be married soon. There was silence on the other end of the line, followed by a response that I expected, but that still hurt me deeply. "Why didn't you tell us before?" my mother asked, as if our disconnection were accidental and not the result of years of favoritism and emotional neglect. Not inviting my family to the wedding was a commitment that cost me more than I imagined. As I closed the call, I felt like something inside me had broken. I knew that this was just the beginning of a series of difficult decisions, and that, although I loved Leandro, our differences were beginning to show cracks that would not be easy to repair. I made it clear to Leandro that, although I would agree to invite my parents to the wedding, I would do so under strict conditions. There would be no other family members, especially not Amara. There would be no dances or father-daughter speeches, and my family would have no significant role in the ceremony. It was my day, and I wasn't about to let the ghosts of my past ruin it. Leandro accepted, although with some reluctance. I knew I didn't have much of a choice if I wanted the wedding to go ahead, but I also knew this would be a test of our relationship. I strongly warned him not to contact my parents on his own. I would be the one to make the call when I felt the time was right. Deep down, I hoped that if I put it off long enough, logistics or lack of time would prevent them from attending. Maybe it wasn't the most honest thing to do, but it was a way to protect myself from the emotional chaos that my family usually brought with it. I suspected that Leandro sensed my intentions, but even if he did, he didn't say anything. Finally, 6 weeks before the wedding, I called my parents. It was a cold and direct conversation. I informed them of the date and time, but made it clear that only they were invited. Under no circumstances could Amara attend. I warned them that if they tried anything, I would personally remove them from the place. Their responses didn't surprise me. Protests, arguments about how this was an opportunity for family reunion, and criticism for still being a spiteful girl. But I stood my ground. This would be our only contact before the wedding, and any violation of my conditions would result in your immediate exclusion. I hung up before they could convince me otherwise. I thought my words would be enough to deter any attempts at sabotage, but I underestimated how much Amara and my parents could interfere. A week before the wedding, I received a call from them informing me that they were at a hotel nearby and wanted to see me. They said they had a special gift they wanted to give me in person, something I must see before the big day. My first instinct was to decline the invitation. I didn't want any repressed emotions to resurface right before the event, but Leandro, ever the conciliator, insisted that I must go, promising that if there was any inappropriate behavior, we would leave immediately. I agreed, although with a heavy heart. We arrived at the hotel, and as soon as we entered, I knew something was wrong. There was Amara, sitting in the center of the room as if nothing had happened. My chest tightened immediately. This was not a gift. It was a trap. My parents had organized this meeting as a last chance for a reconciliation that I had never asked for or wanted. Amara looked at me with a mix of arrogance and nervousness. My parents began to talk, filling the room with words I could barely process. It all sounded like a rehearsed script. It's time to leave the past behind. Family is the most important thing. Amara is here to apologize. But I couldn't concentrate on anything they were saying. Each word bounced around in my mind like an empty echo. All I could feel was the anger bubbling inside me, the pain of years of betrayal and contempt now turning into a silent scream. Leandro tried to intervene, suggesting that he listened to what they had to say. But for me, it was too late. I stood up, looked him in the eyes, and said, "You can stay here and play happy families all you want, but I'm leaving." I left the hotel without looking back, with Leandro following me to the door, but not daring to stop me. I spent that night in a different hotel, alone, with a bottle of wine for company. The tears she had held back for years finally came to the surface, mixing with anger and disappointment. I turned off my phone, unable to deal with any more messages or calls. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I felt betrayed, not only by my family, but also by Leandro, who had allowed all of this to happen. When I woke up the next day, I checked my phone expecting to find messages from Leandro, but there was nothing. No missed calls, no messages explaining his silence. This was unusual for him. He had always been someone who solved problems immediately. I decided to give it some time, thinking that maybe I needed to reflect. But when hours passed with no response, my anxiety began to grow. That night I called him, but my call went straight to voicemail. Something wasn't right. Where was it? Why didn't he answer me? As the days passed, my worry turned to despair. The man I was about to marry had disappeared, and no one seemed to know anything about him. His family wasn't responding either, which only added to my confusion. Leandro's silence was deafening. As the days approached what was supposed to be our wedding day, the reality became impossible to ignore. I had fled. He had abandoned me at a time when I needed him most, leaving me alone to face the consequences of a chaos he had helped create. When Leandro disappeared without a trace days before our wedding, I felt like reality was crumbling around me. Nobody knew where he was or what he was doing. It was as if the earth had swallowed him. After days of uncertainty, I had to face the inevitable, canceling the wedding. I called the organizers, suppliers, and guests, informing them that the event would not take place. I spent what should have been the happiest day of my life hiding at a friend's house, trying to piece together my broken heart. 2 months later, the truth came to light in the cruelest way possible. Leandro had married Amara on the same day he was supposed to marry me. When I found out, I felt like the entire world had become a nightmare scenario. The betrayal was so absurd, so impossible to understand, that it seemed like something out of a horror movie. How could the man who had promised to love me end up marrying my sister, a woman he barely knew? How could Amara, after everything she had done to me, take back something that was mine? The answer didn't come to me, and for months I lived trapped in an endless cycle of anger, pain, and confusion. I felt completely defeated, like Amara had won once again, and I had no way to recover. But somehow I managed to rebuild my life. It was a slow and painful process, but little by little I found emotional stability that allowed me to move forward. I thought I had finally left the chaos of my family and Leandro's betrayal behind me. But everything changed yesterday. Leandro's mother, Selena, called me, crying and begging to meet. He wanted to explain to me what had really happened. At first, I refused. I didn't want to relive the trauma or jeopardize the progress I had made. However, his desperation was evident. Something in his voice made me hesitate, and in the end, I accepted. Maybe, I thought, this would give me the closure I so desperately needed. When we met, Selena told me the truth behind everything that happened. It was a mix of revelations that stunned me and emotions I couldn't fully process. After I left the hotel that night, my parents and Amara spun a web of lies to manipulate Leandro. They told him a completely false version of my childhood, filling it with stories of resentment, bitterness, and self-imposed estrangement. The worst of all is that Leandro believed them. Every word, every lie. Selena explained to me that Leandro was in a state of absolute panic. My call to cancel the wedding, combined with my family's lies, convinced him that I no longer wanted to marry him. In his confusion, he went to my parents for advice, and they, true to their manipulative nature, suggested an absurd solution. Marry Amara to avoid the shame of being abandoned at the altar. Despite the protests of Selena and the rest of his family, Leandro went ahead with the plan. He was so desperate to protect his pride and keep up appearances that he lost all common sense. He married Amara, believing it would be a temporary solution. According to the plan, the marriage would be annulled or divorced as soon as the scandal died down. But Amara had other plans. Once married, she flatly refused to grant a divorce. She demanded to remain his wife, threatening lawsuits and claims if she tried to separate. Selena told me that Leandro had been living in a kind of emotional prison ever since. Amara not only refused to grant him freedom, but also revealed in a drunken state the truth about how he had manipulated the entire situation. He admitted that he had made up most of the stories he was told about me and confessed to stealing my academic efforts years ago. Finally, Leandro understood the magnitude of his mistake and the devastation it had caused. According to Selena, Leandro was devastated. He had disappeared from his home and his social circle, unable to face anyone. He spent days alone, mired in guilt and regret, before Selena managed to find him. When he did, he confessed that he felt like he had made the worst mistake of his life. He said he didn't know how he could apologize to me, or if he even deserved a chance to explain himself. Selena implored me to talk to him, to give him the chance to right his wrongs. I listened to everything in silence, processing each word as if it were a direct blow to the heart. I didn't know what to think. On the one hand, he felt a kind of vindication, knowing that the truth had finally come to light. But on the other hand, the pain and betrayal were still too deep to ignore. How could she face Leandro after everything that had happened? How could I find the words to express what I felt when I didn't even understand it myself? When Selena finished, she looked at me with tear-filled eyes. "He knows he can't fix what he did," she said, "but he needs you to know he's sorry. All he asked for is a chance to talk to you. Just that." I remained silent, unable to respond. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely lost. Everything I had built, all the emotional strength I had achieved, now seemed to crumble in front of me. Should I give Leandro that chance? Or should I protect myself and leave the past where it belongs? When Selena finished speaking, I felt a mix of emotions that was almost impossible to describe. On the one hand, his desperation moved me. She seemed genuine in her attempt to fix something that would probably always be broken. But, on the other hand, I could not ignore the weight of the betrayal that Leandro and my family had inflicted on me. The wounds were still fresh, and although the truth had finally come to light, I couldn't imagine opening that chapter of my life again. When Selena asked me to reconsider and talk to Leandro, my response was firm and definitive. I told him there was absolutely nothing to discuss. We did not exist. Leandro made his decisions, and now he had to live with the consequences. He's my sister's husband. Selena. No matter how he got there, there's no way I'm getting involved in this mess, I told him, my voice tinged with a tone that left no room for argument. Selena started crying, begging me to at least give Leandro a chance to explain himself, but I knew that even if I did, it wouldn't change anything. He believed them. He believed every lie and chose to protect his pride rather than listen to me or trust me. That's not the kind of person I want to associate with, even to close a chapter, I responded, with a coldness that made it surprised even myself. When we finally said goodbye, Selena asked me to think about it. I vaguely promised him that I would, although I knew in my heart that there was nothing to reconsider. I left that meeting feeling exhausted, like I had stepped back into those dark days after the canceled wedding. The days that followed were emotional chaos. Selena sent me several messages, insisting that I talk to Leandro, but I ignored them all. I didn't want to go back to that pit of pain and despair that had cost me so much to overcome. Blocking her was the next logical step, although I felt somewhat guilty doing so. But it was necessary. My peace of mind depended on it. Finally, after much introspection, I decided not to meet with Leandro. It was not an impulsive decision, but one I made considering everything that had happened. Leandro had his chance to be honest, to trust me, to face difficulties together. But instead, he chose to believe strangers and protect his reputation at the expense of our relationship. I didn't need another conversation to confirm what I already knew, that our story had ended the day he chose to marry Amara. When I last responded to Selena, I was brutally honest. I'm sorry for what's happening to Leandro, but I can't help him. He made his decisions, and now he has to live with them. During the darkest moment of my life, I had no one. I had no parents to support me or friends to support me. They made sure I was okay. Everything I have now, I built from scratch, alone. Leandro has that luxury. He has his family. And if he is suffering now, it is simply karma coming back for everything he did. After sending that message, I blocked her. Not because I didn't feel empathy, but because I knew that any future interaction would only open wounds I was trying to close. I had spent too much time rebuilding my life to allow Leandro or my family to drag me back into that chaos. The days that followed my decision were strangely calm. Although I knew my choice might seem cold or insensitive to some, I also knew it was the right thing for me. Leandro had to learn from his mistakes, and I couldn't be the one to help him in that process. She'd gone through the pain alone, and now it was her turn to face it. Sometimes I wonder if they will ever look for me again. Whether Leandro will manage to escape his marriage to Amara, or whether he will remain trapped in that relationship he chose in a moment of panic. But those questions no longer keep me up at night. Finally, I feel like I've found some peace in knowing that the truth has come to light, and that somehow the universe is balancing the books. I know that I will never recover what I lost, the trust in my family, the love I once felt for Leandro, or the dreams we had together, but I also know that I am stronger now, more resilient, and ready to move forward. There is nothing that can change the past, but the future is still full of possibilities. This is the last time I will talk about this story. I closed the door, and this time I won't open it again.